Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sungmin, and I'm pleased to be able to present our work towards objective-tailored genetic improvement through large language models. Um, as you all, since we're at the genetic improvement workshop, I'm sure you all know what genetic improvement is. As the website says, is it focuses on the repair of optimization of software using computational search and evolutionary processes, often outperforming human developers at these tasks. Now, genetic improvement one good thing about genetic improvement is that any results that come from the genetic improvement process has been proven over multiple cycles. This is because it's difficult to survive the genetic improvement cycle without actually meeting um, whatever goal that the fitness function entails. And perhaps because of this good property, genetic improvement has been successfully deployed in many different domains, such as automatic program repair, where genetic improvement was used to remove bugs, reducing the energy consumption of a program, and also to reduce the execution time of complex programs such as Minisat. Now, genetic improvement has been deployed in these various domains, but one interesting aspect is that they all shared the same error representation. This error representation was introduced in a key paper by Langdon and Harman, which successfully improved the performance of a large project. Now, if we look at the edit representations, there are three of them. The first is replacement, where one expression from the project is replaced with another. The second is deletion, where a statement is simply deleted. And finally, there is an insertion operator, which will copy and paste a statement into a different location. And so you can see that these edit representations are quite general, and that is perhaps why they could be used to optimize software in quite different domains, such as automatic program repair or reducing energy consumption. Now, there's no rule that says that edit representations or mutation operators need to be this generic. Indeed, we could imagine specialized operators actually being more effective. For example, if our objective was to reduce the execution time of programs, then we could consider, for example, a memoization operator to improve computational speed. Um, but where by memoizing the results of a function, we could improve execution speed at the cost of increased memory use. Here, this would be difficult to achieve with the general operators that we saw earlier, as uh, it would be difficult to achieve using the general operators, as first of all, not all of the ingredients might be included, and second, one would need, even if the ingredients were there, one would need to combine all the ingredients in the right order to actually get the memoization effect, and so that could be difficult for genetic processes. And so we could imagine specialized operators include, for example, the memoization operator being more effective, but they are also more difficult to implement. And it's cumbersome because we have to implement different operators for different objectives. And so perhaps this is why the work that I saw earlier all shared the same um, mutation operators, for example, or representations. So if we sum up what I said up to now, the strength of genetic improvement process is that results have already been verified as a part of the genetic process. And so when we have any results, we can be quite sure that they actually meet the objective. On the other hand, some weaknesses are that specialized operators, which could be more effective, can also be more difficult to implement. And oh, okay. Sorry, I skipped a slide. But anyway, the results can be natural due to an issue of bloat. Now, where do large language models fit in this picture? Large language models can generate natural code for, first of all, because they were trained on a large corpus of developer written code. And so they have modeled that distribution, and as you can see on the slide, can effectively generate plausible looking code. And so this can be potentially used to combat the unnaturalness issues that stem from genetic improvement results. Meanwhile, another interesting application of large language models are code brushes, which were somewhat recently introduced by GitHub. Here in code brushes, the main feature is that you can ask a large language model to change the code in a certain style. For example, on this slide, we have a function with a bunch of ternary operators. And so in this case, excessive use of ternary operators has made the code very difficult to interpret. If we use the make more readable brush, which on the back end is essentially asking the large language model to make this more readable, we will end up with code like this, which uses if-else-if statements and ultimately is much more readable than the earlier code that we saw. And so while code brushes are interesting in their own right, the important implication for genetic improvement is that we can ask the large language model to optimize code based on the traditional genetic improvement objectives. For example, we provided some inefficient code in our paper. The first is time inefficient code, which calculates Fibonacci numbers in exponential time. On the right, you see memory inefficient code, which requires O(n) space to actually calculate Fibonacci numbers. Now, in our paper, we asked for optimized code using a simple prompt like this. So we would add a comment saying original time inefficient code, put in the original inefficient implementation, and then prompt the large language model to predict the fixed time efficient code, and had it to autocomplete the rest of this document. And what it generated was some time efficient or memory efficient code where the inefficiencies from earlier were effectively removed. And so we can see that and also in this case, the code was executable and actually returned the correct results. And so we can see from this example that large language models are capable of of software improvement, sorry. And so they can be used as a code improvement tool. Now, does this mean that in the future, code improvement will be mostly done by large language models and that there's not much of a place for genetic improvement? I don't think that's the issue, primarily because there's no guarantee attached to large language model results. For example, they are prone to hallucination. As you can see on the left, all the yellow text is demonstrably false. And so even if we get improvement results from a large language model, it might not even compile or it might not execute. And so there's that issue. Furthermore, Sarkar and others identified the potential of large language models to introduce subtle bugs, as you can see on the right. And so even if the code compiles and can actually be executed, it might contain subtle bugs that ultimately hurt developer performance. So to recap the issues that the strengths and weaknesses of large language models here, we identify that large language models are good because objective specific changes can be made simply by asking for them. And as we saw earlier, the results are natural as a result of the training process. Meanwhile, there is no guarantee on the veracity of the results, as we saw just before. And so this is why I think that there is significant synergy between these two techniques, because one's weakness is the other's strength. For example, in genetic improvement, we talked about how specialized operators could both be more effective, potentially more effective, but difficult to implement. Meanwhile, in large language models, we can simply make changes by asking for them. And so there's no difficult implementation required. All we have to do is type what we need in a few sentences, and that will be enough. Meanwhile, for large language models, there's no guarantee on the veracity of the results. But if we imagine a large language model output that went through the genetic improvement process and survived, then we would have a lot more confidence in that output, as those results would have been verified as a part of the genetic process. And so as a result, I expect that by combining large language models and genetic improvement, both will benefit. First, by the possibility of directed changes where large language models would make jumps towards the right direction. And at the same time, we would allow for safer large language model usage, as the large and potentially destructive changes from large language models are contained by the genetic improvement loop. Now, this part isn't part of my paper, but I just wanted to provide an example of how we could integrate large language models into genetic improvement in a practical sense. And so, first of all, we could expand the BNF grammar that we saw from earlier by allowing arbitrary donor expressions instead of restricting the donor expressions to come from strictly the same project code. And so by allowing arbitrary code here, what we could do is, for example, we could place large language models in multiple places. To start off, we could initialize the population using large language model generated results. And while the large language model generated results would be usual code, we could drop them back down to the BNF to the expanded BNF grammar that we saw earlier, and then proceed with the genetic improvement loop as we saw earlier. In a similar note, we could generate mutations from large language models and drop them back down to the grammar again. And finally, we could clean potentially bloated results or any unnatural results using large language models. And so I think that there is a wide range of places where large language models could be used to help genetic improvement, and that the integration itself is not technically difficult either. To conclude, I argue that traditional genetic improvement achieved good results with general operators, but it was not objective specific, and that the results could suffer from issues like bloat. Meanwhile, large language models can generate plausible code and be objective specific in their edits, but they provide no guarantee of good results. And so as a result, I argue that the two techniques have significant synergy and that large language models can be easily placed in the genetic improvement loop. So that's it, and thank you for listening.